The river came for her like it had a grudge. Salt Fork roared through the canyon in the dark, a red, churning wall that tore branches from the cottonwoods and hammered mud against the rocks. Elias Mercer saw the body only when lightning cracked open the sky. A slim form tangled in flooded reeds, an arm lifting once, then vanishing under the froth. By the time he reached her, the water was ice around his ribs and full of stones that bit like teeth. His fingers closed on wet buckskin, on hair heavy as riverweed, and he dragged her toward the bank with a growl that was half prayer, half curse. She was weightless and limp when he threw her onto the slick rock, lips blue, eyes closed, as if the river had already taken her claim. Hours later, in the dim smoke of his cabin, her lashes fluttered. Dark eyes stared up at him, wild with fear. Her voice came out broken, each word a struggle. "Don't hurt me. Just tell me why you saved someone you don't know." Morning crawled slowly into Salt Fork Canyon, pale and uncertain, as though the storm had stripped the world down to its bones. Mist clung to the juniper branches outside Elias Mercer's cabin, turning the needles silver. The ground smelled of wet earth and crushed sage. The air hummed with the soft dripping of water retreating back into the thirsty soil. It was the kind of morning that came after violence, quiet, watchful, almost reverent. Inside the cabin, the fire he had tended through the night had burned low, but enough heat lingered to soften the chill that tried to reclaim the room. The woman lay in a bed of cedar frames and worn buffalo hide, her breath shallow but steadier than before. Her hair, black as obsidian and heavy with river silt, spread across the blanket like spilled ink. She clutched a small leather pouch at her chest, fingers curled around it, even in sleep, as though letting go would unravel something vital. When she stirred, Elias was sitting at the edge of the room, shoulders hunched, sharpening a small hunting knife only to keep his hands busy. He made no move toward her. He simply lifted his gaze, the flicker of fire painting amber into the lines of his face. His eyes, pale and steady, held a silence born not of danger, but of a man long accustomed to speaking less than he felt. The woman blinked at the ceiling beams, confused by the scent of smoke and iron instead of river water. She tried to push herself upright, but weakness betrayed her, and she fell back with a quiet gasp. Elias set the knife aside and rose slowly, deliberately, giving her time to see every inch of movement. "You're safe," he said, voice low, almost rough from disuse. "This is Salt Fork Canyon, my cabin." She stared at him, fear and exhaustion warring in her eyes. Her lips parted, but the English faltered on her tongue. "River big," she whispered. "I fall." Elias nodded once. "You did. I pulled you out." She studied him, confused, then wary. "You man," she asked, as though unsure if the word meant enemy or savior. "Elias," he corrected gently, tapping his chest. "My name is Elias Mercer." She hesitated before tapping her own chest. "Ahioka." The name came soft, shaped by a language older than the timber beneath them. He repeated it quietly, careful with the syllables. She blinked, surprised. Perhaps that he tried. The storm-tossed fear slowly sharpened into alertness, and she scanned the room with quick, assessing glances. There was a forge built into the far wall, the iron tools dark with soot. A single table carried a tin cup, a folded cloth, a coil of rope that had nothing to do with restraint, just the everyday tools of a solitary man. A single bed, a single chair. A man who had not expected company. Ahioka's gaze fell on the object dangling from a nail by the door, a simple silver ring on a leather cord. Her brows pinched with the faintest question. Before she could speak, Elias reached forward and gently nudged a cup of water toward her. "Drink," he said, slow. She obeyed only when he stepped back. Her hands trembled around the cup and the water spilled onto her wrist. She muttered something in Apache, soft, steadying, before trying again. The pouch at her chest shifted with her breathing, and Elias noticed her fingers tighten around it instinctively, protectively. There was meaning there, but he didn't ask. Outside, a raven called across the canyon, its voice echoing through the damp morning. The world was settling again, returning to its rhythm. But inside the cabin, something new had begun. a fragile, uncertain thread stretching between a man who had shut himself away from life and a woman who had nearly lost hers. And neither of them yet understood how deeply the canyon would change them both. The sun had climbed just high enough to brush the canyon walls with copper when Ahioka tried to rise again. The fire had warmed her limbs, but weakness lingered like a second shadow. She pushed the blanket aside with a quiet, determined breath, bracing a hand against the bed frame. Elias, who had been repairing a cracked lantern by the window, noticed the shift instantly. He set the lantern down with deliberate slowness. "Easy," he said. "You're still hurting." Ahioka stiffened at the sound of his voice. "No touch," she said, the words halting but firm. He lifted both hands, not in surrender, but in promise. "I won't." She studied the space between them as if measuring its safety. Only when he stepped back did she attempt to stand. Her legs trembled beneath her, still unsure of solid ground after the violence of the river. She managed one step before the room tilted. Elias moved reflexively, but stopped himself inches from her, fingers curling into a fist at his side. "I said no touch," she whispered, breath shaking. "And I heard you," he replied, voice steady. "Just don't fall." For a moment they hovered there, her swaying, him rooted and tense, as though the air itself was holding them apart. Ahioka steadied herself with one hand on the wall. Her gaze flicked to the door, its wooden plank glowing faintly from morning light. Freedom, fresh air, a world she recognized. She took another unsteady step toward it. Elias watched, jaw tight. "You shouldn't go outside yet. The ground's slick. River's loud today." She didn't understand every word, but she caught enough. River outside, danger. Her lips pressed thin. "I try." She reached the door, pushed it open with effort, and the canyon's breath rushed in, cool, sage-scented, tinged with the memory of rain. She stepped into the threshold but swayed again, gripping the frame until her knuckles whitened. Elias hovered behind her, still refusing to touch her, even as instinct tugged at him to grab her shoulders. "If you need help, I walk," she said sharply, the English imperfect but the intent unmistakable. He fell silent. The canyon stretched before her, still damp from the storm. Water trickled down the red rock faces. The junipers shimmered with droplets that caught the sunlight. It should have been peaceful, but Ahioka shivered. She stared at the river below, the same river that had nearly claimed her. A broken whisper escaped her in Apache, something like a prayer or a warning. She reached for the railing Elias had built outside, the wood rough and familiar beneath her fingertips. But her strength faltered. Her body leaned forward, perilously close to buckling. This time Elias didn't move. He could have caught her, could have saved her again. But he remembered her fear, her words in the dark. "Don't hurt me. Don't touch." So he stood behind her, a silent wall, ready but waiting for permission he knew might never come. Ahioka steadied herself slowly, breathing in through her nose, out through parted lips. When she finally turned, her eyes met Elias's, and something passed between them. Confusion, gratitude, weariness, and something softer beneath all of it. Something she tried to hide. "You stay far," she murmured. "I will," he answered quietly. "But I won't let you fall." The words froze her in place, not because she feared them, but because something in his tone, something raw and unguarded, was unfamiliar to her. She searched his expression, as if trying to decipher a language written without words. He waited. She looked away first. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the murmur of the recovering river. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't cold either. It was the silence of two people circling the edges of a moment neither understood yet. When she stepped back into the cabin, Elias followed at a respectful distance. She paused near the fire and glanced over her shoulder at him. Not an invitation, not trust, but not rejection either. It was the smallest shift, but in a place like Salt Fork Canyon, even small shifts could move mountains. Days passed in the canyon as slowly and quietly as water carving stone. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving behind a land that glittered under the sun. And inside the cabin, a fragile rhythm began to form, hesitant at first, then steady, like two hearts learning to beat beside each other without fear. Ahioka was the first to rise each morning. Long before Elias had fully woken, she would sit near the fire, legs folded beneath her, warming her fingers and whispering words in Apache that drifted through the cabin like soft smoke. Sometimes she prayed, sometimes she simply breathed. Elias never interrupted. He only listened, letting the strange, melodic syllables settle into the cracks of his quiet home. Her English remained limited, but the way she moved began to speak louder than her words. She straightened the blankets he never bothered folding, swept dust from corners he hadn't noticed in years, and arranged the few objects he owned, tools, a tin cup, a chipped wooden bowl, into neat, thoughtful order. When she found an old coat hanging near the door, she repaired a tear he had ignored for months, her stitches small and tight, nearly invisible. Elias watched all of this from a distance, uncertain of what to make of it. He had not asked for help. He had not wanted company. And yet, seeing her fill the space with quiet intent stirred something long dormant in him. A warmth that felt dangerous, like a fire he wasn't sure he had the right to feed. To balance the silent offering she gave, he began to offer his own. One morning when Ahioka stepped outside to breathe the crisp canyon air, she found a stack of fresh firewood split cleanly beside the door. Another day, when she struggled to fasten the clasp of her buckskin top with one hand, Elias simply nodded toward the table, where he had carved a smooth wooden comb and set it near her pouch of herbs. She touched it gently, almost reverently, before slipping it into her belongings without a word. Their conversations were slow and halting. Elias would teach her a new English word each day, drawing it on a scrap of charcoal-blackened wood. Water, he said one morning, writing the letters with steady strokes. Ahioka repeated them softly, then pressed her palm to her chest. Nucci is wind, she whispered, offering him the Apache counterpart. Her words were careful, deliberate, as if she were placing something fragile in his hands. Elias tried the sound, stumbling over the fricative, and Ahioka's lips curved in the faintest fleeting smile. Their lessons continued like that, simple but strangely intimate. Fire, home, safe. Safe was the hardest. She repeated the words several times, tapping her sternum, her brows lifting in question. Safe means no harm, Elias explained, searching for words she would understand. Safe means you can breathe. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. I safe here? Elias swallowed. The truth settled thick in his chest. Yes, he said, you're safe here. The moments between those lessons filled with shared tasks. Ahioka insisted on gathering herbs along the canyon ridge once her strength returned. Her movements were careful but sure, her eyes scanning each plant with the practiced knowledge of someone trained since childhood. Elias followed her at a respectful distance, not hovering, but never far enough that she felt alone. When she found a cluster of desert sage, she knelt and trimmed the stems with a bone-handled knife. Elias crouched beside her, pretending interest in a broken rock while stealing glances at the way the wind lifted her hair. You use that for medicine? He asked. She nodded, tapping her wrist where the river's ropes had burned her skin. For hurt, for heal. He let the silence linger before offering his own past, piece by piece. I used to know a boy, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the canyon below. A storm took him. I tried to save him, couldn't. Ahioka stilled, her hands poised above the sage, lowered gently. Storm strong, she murmured. Not you fault. He didn't respond, but the muscle in his jaw softened, as though her broken English had carried a truth he had not been able to speak aloud. Later that week, he took her to the corral where his gray gelding grazed lazily under the afternoon sun. When Ahioka approached, the horse lifted its head, ears flicking curiously. Ride? She asked, the single word hopeful yet hesitant. You know how? Elias asked. She gave a small nod. Before, yes, before being taken, before the river, before this strange man with careful hands and quiet eyes. Elias saddled the horse, then held the reins out to her. She placed her foot in the stirrup, but her balance wavered, and instinctively he reached out. His palm brushed her waist, light, steady, just enough to keep her upright. Ahioka froze. Elias's breath caught. I'm sorry, he said quickly, pulling his hand back. You said no touching. She looked down at him, her eyes searching his. This not hurt, she whispered. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. With his help, but with her permission, she mounted the horse. Elias walked beside her at first, hand lightly on the saddle strap. She tightened her grip on the reins, inhaling deeply, as though reclaiming a forgotten part of herself. After a few circles around the clearing, she laughed. A small, broken laugh, but real. Elias hadn't heard a sound like that in years. It hit him with the force of the river he had fought to save her. A warmth rose in him, fierce and bewildering. In the evenings, they sat outside the cabin, watching sunset pour gold across the canyon. Sometimes Ahioka hummed an Apache melody, low, winding, half prayer, half memory. Elias never asked what the words meant. It was enough that she chose to share them with him. One night, as the last of the sun slipped behind the ridge, Ahioka looked at him a moment too long. He looked back, unable to break away. Something unspoken bridged the space between them, something neither of them named, but both quietly acknowledged. Salt Fork Canyon had taken much from them. Now it was giving something back. Autumn crept into Salt Fork Canyon quietly, its arrival marked not by color. This land was too hard for the softness of changing leaves, but by breath. The air thinned and cooled, the wind sharpened. The river, once swollen and furious, now moved with a slower pulse, as though it, too, was settling into a calmer season. By then, Ahioka walked the canyon confidently. Her wounds had healed, her strength had returned, and her English, still broken, still stitched together with pauses, was enough for simple truths. Elias had grown accustomed to hearing her voice in the cabin, the soft shuffle of her feet in the early dawn, the whisper of melodies she hummed while drying sage over the fire. She belonged to the rhythm of this place now, and sometimes Elias forgot she had ever been a stranger at all. But the world remembered. It was late afternoon when the quiet shifted. A shadow moved along the ridge, then another. Elias, returning from checking his traps, spotted a lone rider descending the slope, a man wrapped in buckskin and carrying a staff marked with Eagle Ridge symbols. His horse traveled slow, unthreatening, but something in the way he scanned the canyon made Elias's gut tighten. Ahioka, who had been sorting herbs near the cabin door, looked up. The moment she saw the rider, her breath caught, her fingers stilled. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than air. "Nantan," Elias glanced at her. "Someone you know?" She nodded once, stiffly. "Messenger from my people." The rider stopped several paces away, raising a hand in greeting. Ahioka stepped forward, shoulders squared, chin lifted, but Elias saw the tremble in her fingers. Nantan dismounted with fluid grace and approached her slowly, respectfully, saying her name with the cadence of someone who had feared he might never say it again. "Ahioka," he said, "we heard you were taken. We searched for weeks, then the storms came." His gaze softened. "I am glad the river returned you." Ahioka swallowed. "You find me here?" "Yes." Nantan's eyes flicked briefly to Elias, assessing but not hostile. "The Eagle Ridge prepares to leave this canyon. Our elders have chosen to move north before the snows. We depart soon. If you wish to come home, it must be now." The words landed like stones. Ahioka's face, once lit by the calm of canyon days, tightened with conflict. She looked toward the distant ridges where her people lived, and then back to the cabin, the place she had healed, learned to breathe freely. Elias stood a little behind her, silent, his jaw set, his breath shallow. He understood without anyone explaining. She had a family somewhere out there, a life before the river, a home not made of cedar walls and worn buffalo hides. He had known this day would come, had told himself he would be ready. He wasn't. Ahioka spoke slowly, carefully, as if piecing her feelings into English that did not come naturally. "My people need me." Nantan nodded. "We need all our daughters, our healers, our voices." Ahioka touched the leather pouch at her chest, the one she carried even while drowning. Elias knew then that she was remembering the world she came from, the one she did not choose to leave. "I stay here," she murmured, almost to herself, "and I lose them." Her eyes lifted to Elias and something inside him flinched. He forced himself to look calm. "Your home is with them," he said quietly. "If they want you back, you should go." Ahioka stared, searching his face for something he refused to show. "You want me go?" He hesitated just long enough for the hurt to flicker in her eyes. "It's not what I want," he rasped. "It's what's right." Nantan stepped back, giving them space. He sensed the weight of what was unfolding. Ahyoka turned away, walking a few paces toward the river. She stared at its slow, brown sweep, the same river that had nearly ended her life, the same river that had delivered her into Elias's hands. She whispered a word in Apache, low and mournful. Elias followed only far enough that she could see him but not feel cornered. Ahyoka, he said, voice rough. Your people. They're your blood, your history. I can't keep you from that. She closed her eyes, but here her hand lifted weakly, motioning toward the cabin, the firewood, the horse, the worn boots by the door. Here my spirit rest. His throat tightened. He had no answer that wouldn't betray him. Nantan watched, patient and solemn. I will return at sunrise, he said. Decide with a clear heart. He mounted his horse, offered one last look full of understanding, and rode back toward the ridge. The canyon was silent again. Ahyoka did not move for a long time. The river whispered below, soft and steady, as though urging her to choose life, whichever shape it took. Finally she spoke. I not belong two worlds, she said quietly. Must choose one. Elias forced the word out, though it hurt more than the river's cold bite. Yes. She turned her face away so he could not see the tears forming at the edges of her eyes. And in that moment, when she stood between the world she came from and the one she had found, Salt Fork Canyon held its breath once more. Night settled over Salt Fork Canyon with a gentleness that felt at odds with the turmoil inside the cabin. The sky stretched wide and cold above the red rocks, the stars sharp as needles stitched into black cloth. Inside, the fire cracked softly, its glow brushing against the walls, casting Elias and Ahyoka into a shifting tapestry of gold and shadow. She had not spoken since Nantan left, not truly. Her movements were clipped, quiet, cautious, as though every breath might tip the fragile balance inside her chest. Elias, meanwhile, moved through the cabin like a man trying not to disturb dust on a coffin. He reached for the kettle, then set it down, picked up a blanket, then folded it twice just to put it back exactly where it had been. Eventually, Ahyoka sank onto the edge of the bed, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly around her pouch. Elias stood across the room with the fire between them, its light flickering across his tense shoulders. The silence thickened until it pressed against their throats. Finally, Elias exhaled and spoke. You should sleep. Big choice tomorrow. Her chin lifted. Sleep not fix heart. He blinked, surprised by the clarity of her words. Her English was improving, but emotion sharpened it now, making it almost fluent. What does your heart say? He asked quietly. Ahyoka inhaled shakily. My people, my blood. They know my songs, my stories. They know my father, my mother. Her voice thinned. But they not know me now. Elias stepped closer, slow as approaching a skittish horse. What do you mean? She looked up at him for the first time since sunset. River changed me, she whispered. Storm changed me. You. Her throat bobbed. You changed me too. The words struck him like an unexpected blow. He swallowed. I didn't mean to. A small, sad laugh escaped her. Change not bad. Elias's gaze softened, but he didn't move closer. Not yet. Not until she chose to close the space herself. The fire cracked again. Ash drifted upward like pale ghosts. I don't want to be the reason you lose your family, Elias said, forcing the truth out, even as it twisted inside him. I've already lost enough for both of us. I can't ask you to give up your people. Ahyoka lowered her eyes. You not ask, but if I go, I lose you. His breath hitched. For a moment he couldn't speak. She stood then, each movement trembling with held-back fear. She walked toward him until only the fire separated them. Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from the courage it took to say something she had no words for in her own language. If I stay, she whispered, hands curling at her sides, your heart has room for me? The question landed like a stone dropped gently into deep water, soft, but sending rings wide and far. Elias's jaw clenched, his chest rose with a whining, uneven breath. For a moment he looked away, as if searching the shadows for permission to feel what he felt. When he looked back at her, his eyes were unguarded, completely, painfully human. "It has been yours," he said, voice low and raw, "before I ever knew it." Ahioka inhaled sharply, the sound more like a sob than a breath. She stepped around the fire, hesitant but certain, closing the final distance between them. Her fingers reached out and brushed the sleeve of his shirt, not a full touch, but enough to ask the question her English still struggled to carry. He lifted his hand, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he let his palm settle gently over hers. Ahioka's eyes fluttered shut. Elias lowered his forehead to hers, the gesture simple, ancient, wordless. The fire warmed their joined hands. The canyon wind hummed outside. Somewhere far above, the stars shifted, indifferent yet somehow bearing witness. "You don't have to choose alone," Elias murmured. "I'm not alone," she answered, each word shaped with certainty. "Not now." The night held them like a vow. The river, quiet in the dark, whispered its approval. And for the first time since the storm, Ahioka's heart was calm. Dawn broke soft and pale over Salt Fork Canyon, the first light slipping between the high red cliffs like a whispered blessing. The river below moved gently, its surface no longer swollen or angry, but quiet, steady, as if it, too, had reached the end of a long grief. Smoke rose from Elias's chimney in a thin blue thread, curling into the chilled morning air. Ahioka stepped outside first, her breath clouded in the cold, but her eyes were steady as they traced the familiar shapes of the canyon. The land no longer felt foreign beneath her feet. It felt chosen. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open, and Elias emerged, shoulders broad beneath his worn coat, the same quiet warmth in his gaze that had been there since the night she asked him the question that changed everything. Nantan appeared at the ridge not long after, guiding his horse with calm purpose. He dismounted and approached them with a respectful incline of his head. His gaze moved from Ahioka to Elias, then back to her, reading the truth in the air before she even spoke. "You have chosen," he said. Ahioka nodded. "I stay." Nantan studied her closely. "The elders will accept your choice. A woman's spirit knows its home." His voice softened. "I will bring them your peace." He pressed his forehead briefly to hers in blessing, then mounted his horse again. As he rode away, the canyon swallowed the sound of hooves until nothing remained but the faint rush of the river and the slow beating of two hearts standing side by side. Weeks later, with winter approaching, Elias and Ahioka rode into the small settlement beyond the canyon, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled along a trading route. They stood before the town's only preacher, a man who looked startled at first, but gentle enough to listen. In the glow of lantern light, Elias took Ahioka's hand, and she whispered her vows carefully, each English word shaped with deliberate care. Their marriage was simple, quiet, witnessed only by the preacher, his wife, and the cold wind drifting under the eaves. But when Elias slid the silver ring, once tied to his past, onto Ahioka's finger, something deep in the canyon seemed to shift, a closing of one life, the beginning of another. Spring found them back at Salt Fork, where Ahioka's laughter moved through the cabin like birdsong. A cradle Elias carved himself sat near the fire, and inside it lay a child with dark eyes bright as river stones. The baby gripped Elias's thumb with fierce determination, and Ahioka watched them both with a smile soft as evening light. People traveling through the canyon spoke of seeing a man and woman standing by the river at dusk, the woman's braids glinting like black silk, the man's arms strong around her shoulders. They said the child between them often reached toward the water, as if greeting an old friend. And those travelers whispered that the river there sounded different, gentler, quieter, as though it remembered once taking and once returning, and chose now to cradle the lives that had grown from its mercy. Salt Fork Canyon had never been a place for the faint of heart, but in the shelter of a simple cabin, love had rooted in the red earth. It grew not from luck or fate, but from the courage of two souls who chose each other. And from that choice, a family blossomed beside the river that had nearly taken everything. The story of Elias Mercer and Ahioka in Salt Fork Canyon offers a deeply moving life lesson. Love and healing are found in the courage to honor another's boundary bonds, while choosing to stand by them through life's fiercest storms. Elias, a solitary cowboy shaped by loss, risked his life to pull Ayoka from a raging river, respecting her plea of "don't hurt me," even as he saved her. Their bond, built through quiet gestures, carving a comb, sharing the words like "safe," and standing together against her past, teaches us that true connection grows from patience and mutual respect, not possession. Ahioka's choice to stay, despite the pull of her people, and Elias's willingness to let her decide, show that love is about creating a space where someone can heal and choose freely. This resonates profoundly, urging us to reflect on moments we've stood by someone, respecting their fears while offering unwavering support. Their journey, from a storm-tossed rescue to a family forged by choice, reminds us that life's greatest bonds are built not by chance, but by deliberate acts of care in the face of pain. When have we chosen to stay, honoring another's heart? And what did it teach us about love's quiet strength? If this tale stirred your soul, share your story in the comments. When have you stood by someone through their storm, and how did it shape you? Your voices keep these Wild West narratives alive, weaving a tapestry of courage and connection. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to join our community for more heart-stirring tales. Let's keep the fire of resilience and love burning together, inspiring us to live with intention and care.